Today we're going to work on compound inequalities. In this video, we are going to be able to understand the difference between an and an or inequality, and then we're going to solve and graph these compound inequalities. In our world, we do see compound inequalities all the time. For instance, here's an advertisement for a sale that's happening, and this would be considered an and inequality because it describes a range. The ad says that we have 25% to 50% off this particular item. So when it is a range, if I were to show or demonstrate this on a number line, I would say that my prices are going to fall anywhere between 25% off and 50% off. And I would use a closed circle because it could include the 25 or the 50% off. And it could be possibly anything in between. So if I'm going to graph, it's going to look like that. If I were to write an inequality, I would say that my prices, which might be represented by X, could be in a range that falls anywhere between 25 and 50% off. Well, my X, my prices, would have to be greater than or equal to the 25% off, but smaller, less than or equal to the 50% off. On the other hand, we might have an example in our society of an or inequality. So I want to do this or I want to do something else. And these would be considered separate pieces. I make a choice. This is going to be a choice. They're going to be separate sections. For example, if I said that you could have less than 5 cookies, or you could have more than 10 cookies. What would we do? How would we show that? Well, if I'm going to draw a number line, I would have my two sections. I'm going to have my 5, and if I had less than 5 cookies, I would have numbers that are smaller than 5. Or if I had greater than 10 cookies, I would have numbers that are larger than 10. And when we write it as inequalities, we simply put the word or in between, and it is two separate sections. If we take a situation and we want to write a compound inequality, we want to change the words into symbols, this is what it might look like. First example. The ages of the 12 children in the class range from 5 to 7 to 12 to 6 to 9 and 4. Notice I said the word range, so that's going to represent an and situation. So we want to start with our smallest value and show that all of our ages would be between that and our largest value. My ages could be greater than or equal to 4, since it needs to include the number 4, less than or equal to 12, since it includes the number 12. In the next example, to get a B in algebra, you need at least an 80% and lower than a 90%. At least an 80%. So my score has to fall between an 80 and a 90. And if it's going to be at least, that means that my score needs to be greater than or equal to 80, but less than 90. That's again an and situation. Let's take a look at some graphs and see if we can write the inequality from the graph. This is an and inequality because it is shaded in the middle and it represents a range. So when we're writing the inequality, we generally start with the smallest value, my variable in between, and my largest value. Because it is a filled in circle, I'm going to do a less than or equal to, and because it's an open circle, I'm just going to do a less than. And that shows me that X can be between 3 and 8, but it could be equal to the 3. In the next example, I have two separate sections, so that's going to be an example of an or compound inequality. My first one would be x is less or smaller than negative 5, or my values could be greater than, x could be greater than 1. In the last example, again, this represents a range. So we're going to start with our smallest value, negative 3, with our x, or variable, in the middle, and our largest value. And because the circles are closed or filled in, we're going to have less than or equal to for both of them. Let's practice solving and graphing a compound inequality. Now notice that we have 3 different sections instead of 2 that we had with a regular inequality or equation. In this case, then, we're going to start at the center, and again, we want the variable to be isolated or by itself. But because we have 3 sections, we're going to do the same operation for all 3. I want to get rid of the 4, so I'm going to do the opposite operation, which is I'm going to subtract 4 from all 3 pieces. Keep the symbol because I didn't multiply or divide by a negative. And there is my compound inequality. And that says that x lies between the range of 3 and 4. So when I graph, I'm going to draw my number line, labeling 2 tick marks to show my range. Both of them are less than symbols, so we'll have 2 open circles, and I'm going to shade in between to show that my values of x could be in between. On the next problem, again, this is a range or an AND situation, so I want to get the d by itself. I'm going to start by adding 3 to all 3 pieces. So I have negative 6 is less than or equal to 2d, which is less than 16. And now I need to do the opposite operation to get d by itself. I'm going to divide all 3 pieces by by 2. So I have negative 3. I'm going to keep the symbol because I didn't divide by a negative number, is less than 8. Now I want to graph my solution. So I'm going to put 2 tick marks, one at negative 3 and one at 8. Negative 3 will be a closed circle since it's less than or equal to. 8 will be an open circle since it's just less than, and we will shade in between to show the range of the numbers could be anywhere between negative 3 and positive 8. In our next example, we again have a range, so I want to get the f by itself. So I'm going to do the opposite operation, which is to subtract 5 and making sure that you're subtracting 5 from all 3 locations. So I have negative 3 is less than negative f, which is less than 0. But I don't want negative f or negative 1 times f. I want just f. So I will divide all 3 sections by negative 1. And when I do that, because I divided by a negative, please remember that we need to reverse the inequality symbol. Last on this problem then is we're going to graph our solution. So we're going to draw a number line, labeling our tick marks, and please be careful that you have these in the correct number line order. The 0 would be before the 3. And because they are both symbols that are greater than, we're going to use open circles, and since it is a range, we are going to shade in between, showing that any values between 0 and 3 would be solutions. The next example is one of an OR situation. When we have an OR, we simply have two separate inequalities, solving just like we did in the last lesson. We want to get the variable by itself. So we're going to subtract 3. That leaves me with 4v is less than negative 8. And now I will do the opposite operation, which is to divide by 4. So I have v is less than negative 2. Notice I left the inequality symbol because I didn't divide by a negative number. In the next one, I'm going to do the opposite operation, which is to subtract 7. So I have negative 2v is less than negative 6. And now I will divide by negative 2. And because I divided by a negative number, we need to reverse our inequality symbol. A negative divided by a negative now will leave me with positive 3. This is an OR situation, which is a choice, and that's going to be two separate sections on our number line. So if you go ahead and draw your number line, the first value will be negative 2 and then positive 3. The negative 2 is less than, so we're going to draw an open circle, and then it says v is less than. V is smaller, so we're going to shade to the left. At the 3, we have a greater than symbol, so that's going to be an open circle, and it says v is greater than. Greater values will be to the right. So when you're solving compound inequalities, be sure if it is a range that you remember that is the word and it's shaded in the middle or going inwards. If it's an OR situation, that means it's a choice and it's going to be two separate sections shading outwards. When we're solving, we use the same operations as solving an equation, but please remember to flip the sign when you need to, when you divide or multiply by a negative number. Please continue with your reflection.